Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Dane, your host of the Rock and Metal Guardian. I hope you're doing great wherever you may find yourselves. Blessings to all of you wonderful people out there. Today's video is a part 1 of 2 where I share and discuss with you the 50 bands and artists I listen to the most. I'm very excited to talk about this. And keep in mind there is no ranking whatsoever. And the categories I will be discussing with type of music is simply rock, metal, and jazz/jazz fusion. So let's go ahead and jump right in, shall we? Starting last is Ian Hunter, but by no means least, again, no ranking. And Ian Hunter is just a treasure. He's a marvel. Still going strong today. Those last 2 albums that he did, I think, are remarkable, with an all-star cast, having members from Stone Temple Pilots and Robin Zander of Cheap Trick, just a slew of different guest artists to make some music with, and I think that's a wonderful way to do things, especially if you're a solo artist and you're winding up your career, so to speak. Let's get some, and this can be a double-edged sword, because you get supergroup kind of things like them Crooked Vultures and things don't pan out. But with Ian Hunter's last 2 albums, parts 1 and 2, they really work so well. Just having fun, that kind of thing. So anyway, Ian Hunter is a marvel, as I said. And when you talk about a frontman being in Mott the Hoople, what a talent, what a voice, inspired by Jerry Lee Lewis, inspired by Little Richard, all that early American-style rock that he just fell in love with as a young man, and then he brought it to the table with Mott the Hoople and with his solo career. And what a great discography. Not much in the way of snooze fest wise. Short Back and Sides, I've gone on record to say, is a little bit, well, actually it's very disappointing. I would say that's his worst album of all. But you have some wonderful tracks. You get into some Dylan-esque style vocals because of the age or what have you. But like Dylan, he's so poetic. He has just, his music is just, lyrically speaking, is so thematically rich. And that's what makes him a treasure. And when he sings from the heart. He has soul. He has a certain energy. He's so vibrant, even in his age. Right? Think of how many artists can you name that in their 80s are still they just keep on keeping on, right? They're doing what they love. They have to, if Bowie was still alive, he would still be, he went on record saying, hey, I gotta put an album out every year or every 2 years or whatever. I gotta keep doing this. I'm not gonna stop. I'm never gonna retire. And I get that. That's when he puts things out, are they as great as the earlier half of the discography? Sometimes they are, sometimes not. But what he puts out is never, to me at least, disappointing. So Ian Hunter, you got some rockin' tunes, you got some mid-tempo stuff, you got some laid-back stuff, and just kind of take it all in with respect to, he's got a serious message to his music, whether you're talking about in his Mott days, Mott the Hoople, or in his solo career. And again, what an overall wonderful discography. So, got to include Ian Hunter. I listen to him all the time. Next, I just mentioned David Bowie. What a great discography. And I did a video on this, perhaps the greatest discography of all time. There are some snoozers, there's 3 or 4, but overall, when you have close to, I think, 30 studio albums, and only 4 of them are stinker albums like Never Let Me Down and Tonight, and a couple others, Black Tie, White Noise, and the 4th one, Lose Me. But hey, a lot of people will point out the greatest solo artists of all time: Prince, Madonna, Cher. Pick somebody, right? Well, for me, it's Bowie. And what a great live discography. Never wanting to an artist with many hats. So many, we talk about having a wonderful broad palette, but Bowie doesn't just have a broad palette. He has many palettes, right? And all those palettes are so colorful and broad, right? And he never stayed in the same place too long. He's been quoted as being the chameleon of chameleons when it comes to, some argued it's because he would get bored with a certain trend or a certain style that he was doing, and he would move on to the next thing. If you talk about his album Low, right, which starts off the Berlin Trilogy, not a commercial success, yet an artistic success. And so he was not worried about, cashing in for commercial success, right? It was about the art, wanting to try new things. Again, he's going on record, and you can see the YouTube video, and I've talked about this in some of my videos where I mentioned Bowie never played to the gallery, that kind of thing, always experimented, in other words, is what he meant. And for better or for worse, hit or miss, it's most often a hit with Bowie. Whether you're talking about his Ziggy persona, right? You're talking about his Aladdin Sane persona, essentially the same thing. You're talking about him doing the Thin White Duke, whatever it is, the modern stuff, the stuff towards the end of his career, which is a marvel. You have essentially a man who's gone through, from a music standpoint, I've said, he has different styles of music, but then the looks would change as he's gone to reflect those, again, the Thin White Duke, etc., reflecting his different artistic endeavors. And he was a painter, right? Definitely a poet among Dylan and Hunter and Prince even. So many of these writers, or just wonderful, Neil Young comes to mind, or just wonderful poets in their own right. And of course, I think Bowie's definitely up there. And again, what a discography. If we divide his discography into 3 eras, there are more phases than that, of course, because of the different personas and different styles. But I divide, in more simpler terms, his discography. You have the, 12 or whatever album run that's just marvelous, then the 4 bad albums, and then from that point on, with the bad 4 albums out of the way, the back half of his career is just equally or close to equally to his first 12 or so albums. So what a treasure he is. A lot of great hits, a lot of great deep cuts, how many artists or bands can you say that you have a treasure trove of deep cuts that are on par with the hits, or sometimes better? So Bowie runs the gamut of that. So that was 2 out the way. Not that I want to rush through this. Speaking of Neil Young is in this. I listen to Neil Young all the time. Not really until my, I would say, mid-20s, even late 30s, and I've always liked Neil Young since a kid, but I really didn't appreciate and want to chase down, the meat of his discography. I have almost every live album he's ever done that's available in a CD form. I have a ton of his studio work, not everything. He has like 50 plus studio albums. I may have, if I'm lucky, half of that, but that's a lot. So again, close to Bowie with respect to, or on equal par with Bowie with respect to, what a wonderful discography. Okay, great masterpiece of an album. Just to show you as an example, Tonight's the Night almost never saw the light of day. Glenn Frey and another member of the Eagles said, "Oh, don't put that out." Glad he did. But Neil Young, that voice that he has, right? Sometimes I listen to him, and all the time that I listen to him, I'm inspired by what he has to say. Again, like Bowie, like Hunter, thematically rich, right? He is one of the best poets from a musician standpoint, along with Dylan and so many others, right? But Neil Young is special because his voice lends itself to that poetry. It's very unique, right? He can get aggressive right, and heavy, in a sense, like the Beatles get heavy, not, heavy metal, but then he has the soft side to him, or that mid-tempo stuff. He's just a wonder. He's a wonder. And Neil Young brings to the table a blend of, he's got different periods, like Bowie, he's got different periods. And whether you're talking about, I have to say this, whether you're talking about him with or without Crazy Horse, doesn't matter. So much of it is wonderful. And when you get into the 90s stuff with Crazy Horse, when you have the resurgence, you get into, he's the godfather or grandfather of grunge kind of thing. He wore flannel way before Kurt Cobain and company did, but even the thrash metal for the big four of thrash metal, like especially Dave Mustaine and Megadeth, tons of videos of them wearing flannel. But anyway, sidebar, Neil Young is amazing. Great unique voice, as I said, great poetic stylings, just a master of his craft, a different animal from Bowie and Hunter and others, but he's just so amazing. And when we look at his whole body of work, you see, as I was trying to get to, different stylings. You have that country stuff that he does, the country rock folk. You have him doing aggressive stuff with or without Crazy Horse. What I was going to say in the 90s when he's in his grunge period, right? The live album with the stacks behind him, it's a 2-disc set. The name of it is the companion piece is Arc, Weldon Arc. Those are just wonderful, where he's playing older tunes, but he's making them more aggressive. So he can do aggressive really well, but he can do so much in the acoustic vein as well. And he has so many wonderful songs, taking stuff that he did with Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young and playing them live. Never want to mix, never tired or never afraid, there's the word, of wanting to mix up the set list and play something new when it was new, to the disappointment or pleasure of the crowd. He wasn't afraid to upset the crowd, if you will. So Neil Young have to include here. And my last artist in this list, of course you know who it is. We're talking about Miles Davis. All the Columbia stuff I eat up with a spoon. Talk about different stylings. I love the earlier stuff too, on Blue Note and what have you. I think just some records on Decca, correct me if I'm wrong. But the early stuff like Cookin' and that sort of thing, that stuff is amazing as well. But I love the artsy stuff the best. The electric period, the jazz fusion period, where he wanted to be a rock star, right? Playing wah-wah, hooking that up to his trumpet, bringing in all these master craftsmen. You have 12 different people on Bitches Brew as an example. Like Bowie, like Neil Young, so many great live albums, the Cellar Door Sessions, Bitches Brew Live, Live at the Fillmore East, Live at the Fillmore West. There's a ton of live material. There's some great compilations which have songs on them that didn't make it onto other albums. You have some stuff before he gets an electric period on Columbia, like ESP and Sorcerer and Nefertiti. Just a wonderful amount of great jazz and jazz fusion from the maestro himself, the master. Again, what a great discography. I'm always listening to Miles since I was 16 and a half. So, yeah, and when you get people come in like Keith Jarrett and Johannet and Zawilny, if I'm pronouncing that name right, and the two I can't, the names off the top of my head are eluding me, but the two guys he brings in for like Harta and Pangea, those two wonderful live albums and other stuff that he did with them in Tokyo and beyond and before, just wonderful guitar players in their own right. I'm just blown away every time I put on a Miles Davis record. It's like listening, it's for lack of a better metaphor, it's like reading Shakespeare, because when I read Shakespeare, there's always something new that I find. When I listen to Miles Davis, there's always something new that gets my attention. John McLaughlin playing with him on the Cellar Door Sessions and on here and other places. And the final thing I'll say about Miles Davis is that he loved to create tension, because he believed that in creating tension, you would create great art. And nothing proves it like this Electric Period on the Columbia years, which is a very long part of his discography. And it wasn't that long ago that I, spent lots of time and money getting all of that to finish that part of the discography that I wanted in my collection. Yeah, he's a treasure, Miles Davis. All right. Now, moving to some avant-garde type of rock. There's only two here, really. The more commercial of the avant-garde is Nine Inch Nails. I don't think I've ever mentioned Nine Inch Nails on this channel before, but Nine Inch Nails, their magnum opus here, the 2 CD version of, I want to call it Closer, the Downward Spiral, excuse me. You have some heavy stuff, you have some stuff that's borderline electronica, heavy metal, dance, electronica, heavy metal, and the shouting vocals from Trent. But then you get stuff like Ghost 1 through 4 and Locusts, and the stuff he did with Atticus Ross for the Girl with the Dragon 2 soundtrack, which is a triple disc, which is quite good. I highly recommend that. The 3 EPs that the last album and the 2 EPs that he did last, and he's supposed to be putting some new stuff out soon, is my understanding. But talk about wonderful, whether you want to call it noise rock, experimental rock, dance, electronica, hard metal, avant-garde, experimental noise rock. Thought-provoking lyrics, sometimes hard to understand where he's coming from, and then you have to spend, like any poetry, lyric types thing that has thematic content to it, you have guys, you want to make your girlfriend happy, you have to spend time with her, right? That's what I tell my students. Poetry, even if it's a short poem, like your girlfriend, you got to spend time with the poem. So same thing with Nine Inch Nails. If you want to get to understand Trent, what he's trying to accomplish from a thematic and artistic, words wise from the band, you have to spend time with the lyrics, as I'm a big fan of. And so from the first album, Pretty Hate Machine, up and through what he's done recently, what a treasure trove in his discography, chasing those halos, right? If you get my joke, trying to track down all the hard to find stuff, because the record label is Halo, right? And Halo 1, Halo 40, right? So I don't have every Halo, but I have what I need. So yes, Nine Inch Nails. When I was a teenager and I had heard that, I would have never in a million years thought that it'd be one of my favorite bands of all time, let alone something I listen to all the time. Next, you know me from this channel, I have to talk about Swans. This is their latest effort, which I did a review on. What's the front here? Live Rope. Yep, great live album. And like some of these artists I've mentioned already, Bowie and Neil Young, what a great, if we talk just about live albums, what a great large discography for live albums, right? And that's a big sticking point with me. I have the playlist in this channel called Live Album Euphoria, because I've always been euphoric about live material going, and that's because of Kiss Alive, the first one. That's what got me into Kiss. And so I don't do this all the time, but what I will often do when someone recommends a band or I discover a new band, I'll listen to the first live album and then go from there. It doesn't always work, or sometimes I just start with the studio. But with Swans, it was the studio stuff. But boy, what a treasure trove, as I said, of live recordings. Some of their live stuff you need to get because you can't find the songs anywhere else, like the album Deliquescence. But if we talk about studio stuff, I did a video on the many phases of Swans. You have that earlier high decibel range, quasi-Godflesh type sounding stuff with the harsh vocals and the shouting vocals, right? Which, for me, I was surprised I liked it, because normally I don't like that stuff. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But for me, it works. And then we get into some other phases, such as what I call the rabbit phase, because you have the albums with the bunny rabbits on the cover. Not sure how to label that. That stuff I've over the years I've grown I've gotten to like those, but I'm not as ecstatic about that era as I am about what the Swans have been doing ever since The Great Annihilator and the live album Swans Are Dead. And the last, you have what's called the vinyl trilogy with The Seer and The Glowing Man, and those last 4 or 5 studio albums, and they got something coming out soon. I'm recording this, it's May 28th, so in 2 days it comes out, but it takes a couple days for shipping, so I'll probably get it middle or beginning of next week. I'm very excited. Of course, I'll do a review on that. So yeah, Michael Gira and crew, with or without Jarboe. If you like experimental noise rock with some pummeling music, but also some kind of soft and meditative kind of droning, and there's other things besides that. Just what a talent. It's not for everyone, but give them a listen if you're not familiar with Swans. If you like Swans, let me know if you haven't already. Those of you who've liked my Swans videos and you shared, thank you for that. So yeah, Swans, listen to them all the time. All right, next are 2 obvious choices, but, well, I hate saying that. I hate that because something's obvious, then why talk about it? It should be obvious, or many were like, well, these are kind of cliched. Well, I can't help the way I feel. So let's start with the Beatles. And this is the only band I don't have a CD for. And I just did a video on them where I ranked their discography, so I'll be brief here. When it comes to the Beatles, took a shining to them at a very young age. And when you're very young, you're going to be you're easily going to have things impress upon you, right? You have a wide range of music from the Beatles. You have the early pop stuff from Please Please Me through, say, Help, or A Hard Day's Night, Help. And then you get into some more experimental stuff with, say, the U.S. Magical Mystery Tour, and Yellow Submarine, with the second half is that orchestral stuff, which isn't my cup of tea. But you really get going with them, and they're so innovative. I won't go down that road. We all know how the Beatles are innovative. I've talked about that a little bit to some degree in a different video, but everyone's probably sick of hearing that. But yes, they are, so innovative. They led the way for so many other bands to follow in their footsteps. Many, not everyone. And so you have 3 of the greatest songwriting, and by lyricists, writing lyrics in Harrison. I'm going to include him first, for whatever reason. Harrison, of course, the dynamic duo is Lennon and McCartney, but Harrison came into his own, I would say, around the Rubber Soul period or earlier, with some wonderful penned material. And of course, Ringo sings from time to time, and he's written some stuff, but regardless of, and you got 4 wonderful singers. I'll tell you now, I'm not the biggest fan of Ringo's songs like Octopus's Garden, but I do like them. I will listen to them more often than not. There's sometimes I'll skip them. Some of it's not on equal footing with the McCartney, Lennon, and Harrison stuff, but it's nice. It's, for lack of a better comparison, well, I don't even want to. That's not even a good comparison. So never mind. I was gonna say Peter Criss, but I actually like Peter Criss when he sings more than Gene. So, yeah. So, and Kiss. So no, how many bands can you think of have 4 singers besides them and Kiss, and maybe Blue Oyster Cult at times? With Bouchard singing and anyway. So the Beatles, you get excuse me, you get George going, being inspired to play the sitar, learning to play the sitar, bringing in the reed organ for the Rubber Soul album, doing what they call plastic soul, so as not to be insensitive to African American soul. We all know that story, right? Because they felt that, and rightfully so, that their version of soul paled in comparison to African American soul music. But they brought that in. And there's tons of homage to early rock and roll in their first 2 or 3 albums, right? So folk music, Indian music, or Middle Eastern music, or that sort of thing. using the harmonium, all kind of innovative stuff with Rubber Soul, and a bit of that beginnings of the psychedelic stuff. And then, of course, the psychedelic stuff with Revolver really hits you over the head. And, of course, Sgt. Pepper's, the concept album, being inspired by the Beach Boys with Pet Sounds. Of the two, I like Sgt. Pepper's better. I'm not the biggest Beach Boys fans, but I do appreciate some of their stuff, more so when I was a very young man, thanks to my dad. I like Jan and Dean better. But that's another story. So the Beatles are just one of those bands that have an amazing discography. In that video that I did on them, I count the 2 Past Masters albums. That's 15 if you count all the studio stuff, including that one US album, Magical Mystery Tour, excuse me. So the notion of the Beatles, the British invasion, them coming in with the Who and the Rolling Stones, and the Pretty Things, the Kinks, right? The Beatles playing at Shea Stadium, all these different inspirational things, but where it's at is listen to the music, to quote the Boston Record, listen to those 15 Beatles albums. There's not much there that isn't wonderful. There's just something magical about the Beatles. The older I get, I find myself wanting to listen to them even more and more, and I listen to the Beatles quite a lot already. So the next band is in that same vein, pretty much, or close to that, but we'll get there in a minute. So, like this, and you'll see the theme here, for the most part, with the exception of one or two, just about all the bands I'm going to talk about, or artists I'm going to talk about, have a large discography, or there's a section of the discography, that an album run that is pretty big, or close to being big. So important. The Beatles are just a marvelous artistic phenomenon, and I'll leave it at that. Next is the Rolling Stones. Okay, now compared to the Beatles, the Rolling Stones have an even larger discography. I want to go, don't quote me, but 40 plus something studio albums. And unlike the Beatles, there's a lot of in the discography. Now, I won't call their earlier stuff, where all the stuff before Aftermath, because with the Aftermath album, that's where they started to dedicate themselves to doing all the songwriting and stop doing covers so much, right? So, because the first three albums, it's all covers, 12 by 5 and don't quote me, I don't know, December's Children, that kind of thing. So, give or take, like the Beatles, right? Those first early albums, mostly or half filled with cover songs, and they're good, but they're not great, right? Eventually, you have to become your own man, or your own woman, or your own person, right? And the Rolling Stones do a wonderful job once we get to Aftermath. Now, there's some albums like Between the Buttons and later on with Black and Blue, which has some decent tracks on it. But the gem of the discography in the Rolling Stones is when Mick Taylor's in the band, and the tail end with Brian Jones with Beggar's Banquet, Sticky Fingers, of course, Exile on Main Street, It's Only Rock and Roll. Let's see, what am I missing? I just showed you Sticky Fingers, Goat's Head Soup. So yeah, and then Mick Taylor leaves the band, and then you get Woody coming in, Ron Wood, and you have some great stuff with him. You have Some Girls, which I just love. You have Tattoo You, which is, I think, some people argue Some Girls is the last great Stones record, and I'm kind of on the fence about that. It's either that or Tattoo You. I love both of those albums very much. And then you're starting to get some snooze stuff, so to speak. Undercover of the Night has one or two wonderful songs. If we go back for a minute, Emotional Rescue, I've warmed up to that. Got some disco on there. But there's 4 really good songs in there, the title track and some other things, which the names of the songs elude me. But yeah, so as I said, Black and Blue's okay. You get some wonderful stuff with, I would say, half of Voodoo Lounge is quite good. I saw them for the Steel Wheels tour. Some of that's pretty good on there. Bridges to Babylon is okay, but the last two albums, Hackney Diamonds, I have issues with Hackney Diamonds because I can't prove it, but that sounds like a lot of AI went into the making of that record, a lot of compression. I can't imagine Mick Jagger sounding that good without the help of AI, but I could be wrong. The Bigger Bang, the one before that, very disappointing. There's one song that they played on the TV show Supernatural, which eludes me, is the song that I like on The Bigger Bang. But yeah, the Stones, you have the Glimmer Twins, the bulk of the songwriting coming from them. I loved when Bill Wyman was in the band. If we talk briefly about them doing cover songs, the album Dirty Work comes to mind because Harlem Shuffle's on that. I loved their version of that, but that was a horrible album for the most part. Going to a go-go, whatever that means. Is that a go-go lounge, I guess? That's okay. Excuse me. So yeah, the Rolling Stones, as cliched as they are a band that I listen to, one of the top 50 of all time that I listen to the most. And as I said, it's mostly in part because of Mick Taylor being in the band, that era, and the last couple with Brian Jones. Between the Buttons is a decent album, not a great album. That's what I was going to say earlier. Anyway, so yeah, the Rolling Stones, when you have a great album like this, Let It Bleed, I failed to mention this, Let It Bleed, Exile, wonderful stuff here. Jagger and crew, gotta love them. All right. So let's see, we did artists, including one jazz artist, and we did two bands which are cliched or expected in many sense. I didn't do them because they're expected, it's because how I really feel, but I call them cliched or expected because a lot of people expect that. How can you not have that right? But that's not why I did. I did it because if they're not played a lot, they wouldn't be in this list. All right, so now we're getting into my next set, kind of a group in parentheses, and this is heavier music. Let's see, how do I want to do this? Yeah, let me go from heavy to heavier, so to speak, kind of. Yeah, let me do that. And then we'll talk about the last group. All right, so this next group is heavy music, heavy metal of sorts, and we're going to start with the Scorpions, Tokyo Tapes. Like so many bands, here's a band that has different phases. You have that first album, that psychedelic, heavy blues rock, krautrock with Michael Schenker on guitar. He comes back later for Love Drive. What it could have been, maybe. Then you get the Uli John Roth period, which I just love. That's why I pulled this one out to show. He was very much influenced by Hendrix. You have a lot of deep cuts that are just wonderful on albums like Virgin Killer and In Trance, right? The second album, Fly to the Rainbow, some wonderful stuff there. Then, of course, you get into the more commercial hair metal-y stuff, hair metal with Blackout and Animal Magnetism and Love at First Sting. Love Drive's my favorite album by them of all time. Changing of drummers, changing of guitar players. You bring Matthias Jabs over to replace Uli, right? And Uli replaced Michael. So a lot of great hits, but also a lot of great deep cuts. And again, I'm a big fan of deep cuts. So for example, on this live album, what is in many ways a deep cut? I would say Polar Nights is not, a hit. That, to me, that's a deep cut, and yet it's here on this live album. So, and what's interesting about them, they do the typical 70s route. They play, some songs from the 50s. They play Hound Dog and Long Tall Sally. Uriah Heep did this. Deep Purple did this. Led Zeppelin did this. So it was the order of the day. And I appreciate the Scorpions doing it as well. Now, I have to say that After Love It First Sting, I'm pretty much out. They don't have a wonderful amount of live albums, but you have this, and you have Worldwide Live. Those are the two they get. So yeah, the Scorpions are one of those twin guitar. They belong to the Mount Olympus of the twin guitar bands or heavy metal bands of all time. So yeah, Scorpions, short and sweet with that one. Next, Judas Priest, speaking of twin guitar, and this is one of my favorite albums by them. When you have Rob Halford coming in, replacing Al Atkins on vocals, thank goodness. My understanding is that Al Atkins had more of an AC/DC style vocals. No disrespect to AC/DC, but I don't know if I would like Judas Priest if all their songs sounded like Bon Scott or Brian Johnson. Again, no disrespect to them because they're two admirable vocalists in the rock and metal world. But what I'm trying to say is Rob Halford is one of those operatic style vocalists that I just love. Going, perhaps inspiring Jeff Tate of Queensryche to do his thing, inspiring the whole power metal subgenre of metal and rock music, like Helloween and so many bands after that. There's some snoozers in the discography, but overall what we have in the Judas Priest discography is quite good, let me start again. What we have in the Judas Priest discography, not counting the stinkers like Ram It Down and Turbo and a couple other ones, and the Tim Ripper Owens era, we have everything from very good through and including masterpiece and legendary stuff. Set of Wings of Destiny, their second album, their sophomore effort, to me is a legendary / masterpiece of an album, despite that it's raw from the sense that it's a Gold Records. Let me apologize for my neighbor who's backing up. He's done. Okay. So back to Judas Priest. Halford has that wonderful vocal range. He can sing at the low register all the way to that wonderful Screaming for Vengeance stylings from start to finish on that song, and Painkiller, right? What a set of pipes he has, even today. But yeah, Judas Priest is in my top 10 favorite bands of all time. Again, with the Scorpions and the band I'm going to talk about next, part of the Mount Olympus of twin guitar rock and metal bands of all time. You have wonderful songs like Screaming for Vengeance, Free Will Burning, Rock Hard, Ride Free, the side A of Point of Entry, all of Hellbent for Leather, all of Stained Class, everything, even the first debut album has some wonderful stuff, as unpolished as it is. It's a great hard rocking album, but everything from Sad Wings to Destiny through and including this are marvelous albums, or close to marvelous. And then you get some stuff later on in the catalog that not exactly makes up for Turbo and Ram It Down, but there's some good stuff here and there, like Redeemer of Souls, 4 or 5 songs on Firepower, and Invincible Shield. There's like 6 or 7 songs in that make up for that. All right, next is Iron Maiden, also belonging in the Mount Olympus of twin guitar rock and metal bands. There's more of them to come, kind of part of this pile, but not entirely. So I picked this album because on most of the time, it is my favorite. Because of songs like Revelations, Flight of Icarus, The Trooper, Die With Your Boots On, and To Tame a Land. But it's such a great discography. Let me start again. Iron Maiden's one of these bands whose first half or first third of their discography is the best part. Everything from those 2 opening albums with Paul Di'Anno on vocals through and including Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. And then we get the comeback album with Brave New World, and a couple songs here on Fear of the Dark, and a couple songs of No Place for the Dying or something like that. And then pretty much that's it for me. The last Senjutsu and the Tomb of Souls or something like that. The songs are just too long, but let's keep this video positive. So Iron Maiden, right? Let's talk about Paul Di'Anno for a minute. This is like Motorhead. I can't prove this, but like Motorhead, I think that those Paul Di'Anno albums united the punks and the metalheads together, because there's that wonderful element of punk with Iron Maiden at this time. And who knows what would have happened. He had Dennis Stratton on the first album, right? He had Clive Burr on the first three. And of course, Bruce Dickinson comes over from Samson after Paul Di'Anno exits from the band. We know why he exited, right? But him dressed in all leather, or that leather biker jacket, set the mood and the tone for that punk/metal aesthetic that Iron Maiden was known for in those early days. You had the love of classic science fiction and horror-themed music with the first three albums. A little more of that later, thank goodness, with Brave New World, like Wicker Man, right? So there's something endearing about those tracks like Invaders and Number of the Beast, which is maybe perhaps Iron Maiden's answer, Bruce Dickinson's song, of course, Iron Maiden's answer to Black Sabbath, next on line for the human sacrifice and that kind of thing. But yeah, what a set of pipes Dickinson has on him still today, going quite strong, like Rob Halford. Twin guitar guys, now there are three guitar players like April Wine, but heavier, with Yarrick, is that his name? Yeah, I can never remember his name. Once Adrian Smith left, but then thank goodness Adrian Smith came back. He has some concept albums, quite a bit of concept albums with Iron Maiden because of Dickinson's love for the band Jethro Tull. And while I'm not the biggest Tull fan, I can respect and accept that, even though I may not like everything by Iron Maiden. Now, what's also interesting is I'm convinced that it's kind of like when a shark gets a smell of blood, that's it for them. They want man flesh, right? And I think once Iron Maiden got a scent of wanting to do progressive or longer tracks, i.e. To Tame a Land, whether here or the next one, Power Slave, great album with Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, that was for them. And since then, they're changing direction for the most part and want to do all these long progressive metal stuff. Or some have argued it's not progressive metal, it's just metal, the songs are just longer. Whatever you want to call that. Okay, great. But yeah, Iron Maiden, great high-pitched vocals, wailings from Bruce Dickinson, and wonderful vocals from... I love Paul Di'Anno's vocals. He can sing in that metal punk vein that he does, but on songs like Remember Tomorrow, he has that soft-spoken, which gives me goosebumps. Look at that. So yeah, Iron Maiden is a great band in so many ways. So I have to include them. Yeah, I listen to them quite a bit. So they're here. Next is another twin guitar band. Go figure. Queensryche. Their debut, their EP is really their debut. 4 tracks, Blinded. 5 tracks if you count the one with the extra song of Prophecy, which should have been included originally on the first EP, and then it's reissued with that, thank goodness, and then some live tracks. There's like 3 or 4 different versions of that first EP. Get the one that has Prophecy plus the live show from the EP in this tour. Again, power metal type vocals, great vocals. Chris DeGarmo, wonderful guitar player in his own right. Too bad he, turned his back on music, and I get why he did that. Michael Wilton and crew, right? Scott Reckenfeld what a great drummer. Of all the bands that I've seen, for whatever reason, this is the band I've seen the most. I think I've seen them 8 or 9 times, all of them in New Orleans here. I think maybe once in Baton Rouge, I believe. But I love this band. Now the problem with Queensryche is first EP through and including Promised Land is where it's at, and then things go kind of south from there. There's some okay stuff after that, but nothing compares to that first early run. Now you have that song on Operation Mindcrime 2 where Ronnie James Dio is the voice of Dr. X. That's a great song. Not much to like on that album though. But while we're talking about Operation Mindcrime, one of the greatest progressive rock albums of all time, progressive rock opera, progressive rock, heavy metal, whatever you want to call it. Great thematically rich album, wonderful lyrics, makes you, think about things in life and all kinds of things. How can we make this? It's a dystopian nightmare, is what It shares the dystopian issues that we deal when we read 1984 and Fahrenheit 451 and the Hunger Games and Brave New World, and the list goes on and on. So yeah, Queensryche is one of those bands that I love this album. I love that first EP. I love Rage Against the Machine, Rage for Order, excuse me. I love Operation Mindcrime, of course, Operation Live Crime. And then there's a little bit of falling off with Empire, but it's still a great album, and Promised Land, I think, is awesome. So yeah, Queensryche. Now changing gears from, part of Mount Olympus of Twin Guitar Heaven. All right, next is Dio. Now, there's some snoozers in his discography, but there's a lot of great stuff here. This first album, which unfortunately he peaked earlier, but there's still some great stuff. That sophomore effort, no sophomore slump with Last in Line. Great from start to finish. Of course, this is the Mightier in spades, but I still love Last in Line. The third album with the dragon on the cover, Sacred Heart, it's got its moments, but it's a softer record because Vivian Campbell's kind of shutting down at this point. Then you get Dream Evil, which is okay, but then when you get Ronnie doing kind of speed thrash metal on a couple songs with Lock Up the Wolves, I love this album. I loved it when I first got it. Then it fell out of favor with me, and then one day I reached for it and realized I sold it. I was like, what was I thinking? And I rebought it again. I love it. And then riding the wave of the album Dehumanizer, his second stint of 3 in Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell, he puts out Strange Highways, and it sounds like a Sabbath record. So Strange Highways is amazing. And then the last great the last great Dio album is Killing the Dragon, which I think is quite good. So yeah, there's a lot to like in the Dio. And of course, Dio's voice. More on that later. All right, Dio. Speaking of later, but Rainbow. Now, I have to talk a little bit about Rainbow. When it comes to Rainbow, you have different vocalists. And of course, for me, it's the first 3 albums. That's where it's at. This, you have a bit of prog because of Stargazer. 8:26 is the length. Only 6 songs, okay? And thematically rich lyrics because Dio. You have the wonderful maestro himself, Blackmore, on those first 3 albums. So you have the trilogy that is the first album, Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, which is essentially Elf plus Ritchie, okay? I think it's wonderful. When Ritchie plays really fast in that section on Still I'm Sad at the end, I go nuts mentally when I hear him shredding his ass off. It's just fabulous. And this is my favorite. Again, a cliched response, but I can't help the way I feel. Just saying it's my favorite makes my hair stand on end. Again, only 6 songs, but what a great album. A lot of majesty to this album, like there is on that first album, but it's a better produced album. And of course, this is the best version of Rainbow on this album, right? Ronnie James Dio, Jimmy Bain, Ritchie Blackmore, it's hard, Tony Carey, and of Cozy Powell. Yeah, it's hard to read, the print is so small. What a great album, and it's too bad they didn't last. And then the third album, Long Live Rock and Roll, is not as good as the first 2. It's my third favorite of those 3, but there's some wonderful stuff there, like Lady of the Lake, the title track, and Kill the King. Those are my 3 favorite. And then you get Down to Earth, which is just a disappointment. I was so disappointed hearing and learning and listening to that Blackmore wanted to be like Foreigner, and not a Graham Bonnet fan. I love Cozy Powell's drums on Down to Earth in a couple songs, but that's pretty much it. I'm not a big Russ Ballard fan. I think there are 2-pen Russ Ballard tracks on that, or cover tunes. But thank goodness you get a little bit of a resurgence, but it's still very pop rock oriented with Jolene Turner on vocals. But you do have some wonderful stuff there with Difficult to Cure, a little Beethoven there, right? And then you have the wonderful, of the 3 that he does, you have the wonderful Straight Between the Eyes. I love that album from start to finish. And then I've warmed up to Bend Out of Shape, so Rainbow. And then you get I can't remember his last name, Doogie on vocals, that last album. You have some wonderful live stuff, like live at Cologne, live at Dusseldorf. There's like 5 or 6 of those in Germany, but the problem is the most live in Munich is now available again. I did a video on that. But the problem with that is that most of those are still out of print. Live in Munich 77 is available. Live in Cologne I have on MP3 format. That is a wonderful. They need to reissue that along with those other ones that I mentioned, but there are more of those. They need to dip in the Rainbow Live Vaults, because on stage is okay as a live album, it's not great, but there needs to be more live Rainbow because of this period. It's so wonderful. So Rainbow, despite the fact that there's only 6 albums I listen to, and I gravitate towards those first 3, I have to include them because I listen to them all the time. All right, next is Motorhead. Getting a little heavier here now, and again, like Iron Maiden, this has gone on record. It's pretty much a fact, according to critics, that Motorhead united the punks and the metalheads because of their blend of heavy metal. Although Lemmy goes on record says it's not metal, it's just rock and roll. Regardless, the look, all the leather at times, and just the overall music aesthetic that Lemmy and Fast Eddie Clarke and Filthy Animal Taylor give is at the same time a metal vibe and a punk vibe. It's hard to describe that aesthetic. Of course, this is all metal with the cowboy look and the sand on the back. This is almost the greatest hits album, Ace of Spades, and the inventors of thrash metal, perhaps because of the Overkill album with the Overkill song, the double bass drum, right? And then you get Filthy Animal Taylor leaving, Fast Eddie Clarke leaving because he didn't want to do Stand By Your Man, right? So we're told him going off to do Fastway. But then you get Mikkey Dee later on down the road on drums, and for a brief moment you had 2 guitarists again, and Phil Campbell, I believe, on guitar by himself. And from that first album through and including Orgasmatron, everything is wonderful. I love Iron Fist. I even love the album with Brian Johnson from Thin Lizzy. Another Perfect Day I think is amazing. Talk about live albums. They have one of the best live album discographies, aplenty in their discography. Live albums, that is. That once Mikkey Dee joins the band after March or Die or Bastards, there's a great run up to a point, and then that last album, even like Before Lemmy's Death, I think is marvelous. But there's a few with Mikkey Dee in the band and Phil Campbell where they're not so good, like Hammered and Motorized. It's like Bowie. There's like 4 albums in their discography I don't even like, and so I don't own them. But you got albums like Aftershock and March or Die and Bastards. I'm one of 2. Of course, I have to talk about this album, Inferno from Motorhead. This is, I think, the best album in the back half of the Motorhead discography. Great from start to finish. The bookends of Terminal Show and Something House Blues are fabulous, and then the things in between, such as Killers, In the Name of Tragedy, Life's a Bee, Down on Me, In the Black, Fight, In the Year of the Wolf, Keys to the Kingdom, and Smiling Like a Killer. Mikkey Dee is amazing in this band, as I've implied. Phil Campbell as well. What a great comeback as a trio in the back stages, if you will, the back end of the Motorhead career. So yeah, I have to include Motorhead. I have everything except 4 albums by them because I like them all that I have. I mean, they're a special band to me. Discovered them in high school. I was going through a Hit Parade or a Kerrang, and I saw these 3 guys dressed in black in a black and white photo, and they looked like mechanics, and anyway, so yeah, and then coincidentally a friend of mine was like, ooh, you like Motorhead? So do I, and we began a friendship because of that. So yeah, Motorhead, I have to include them here. Next, Metallica, and I only like the first 5 albums, really 4.5. There's only about half of the 5th album just called Metallica, aka the Black Album, that I like. My favorite song in there would be The God That Failed and The Struggle Within as a tie. Those are perhaps the 2 heaviest songs on the album. I like my Metallica to be heavy, but we'll never see the likes of this album again. I listened to this all the time, from start to finish, a masterpiece of a debut, perhaps the greatest debut metal album of all time, at least to me. If you had this on vinyl, you know that side A ended with Whiplash. Just great. The way they could have named this album Whiplash because of the material in here. It's so aggressive and heavy. The music could give you whiplash, right, if you're headbanging along from start to finish. The music sounds like Whiplash, if that makes sense, from a figurative standpoint. But yeah, what can you say about Hit the Lights and The Four Horsemen as a 1-2 punch? The Four Horsemen almost being an epic track because it's 7 minutes and 8 seconds long. And then all of side B is just phenomenal. Phantom Lord, No Remorse, Seek and Destroy, Metal Militia. By the time the album's over, if you listen to it from start to finish, you're exhausted. And Motor Breath, Jump in the Fire, and Anesthesia, the weakest tracks on the album, but weak is used playfully or figuratively because I think they're wonderful as well. But they're not as good. They're not as wonderful as the other songs that I mentioned. So again, we'll never see the likes of this again. So aggressive. And then you get Ride the Lightning, of course, which is a little bit of a change in direction because you got a couple tracks in there a little bit more, not exactly commercial, but more commercial oriented. Songs like Trapped Under Ice and Escape, probably the most commercial of those two. Escape is. But you still have some heavy stuff like Creeping Death, thank goodness, and you have the wonderful Light and Shade, or a light intro acoustic, and then the heavy from there on out with Fight Fire with Fire. Foreshadowing, Battery, same setup or formula, acoustic, and then the heavy kicks in with that song. So, and then the marvelous Call of Cthulhu. What a great song, and what a wonderful, what wonderful guitar playing from Hammett on that. It's very, I don't want to say majestic. It has an ethereal quality to it, and yet it's got a classical feel to it, and yet it has a doom feel to it because of the title. There are moments of that, impending doom or warning, in the I guess what you would call the motif of the song. And then the crescendo at the end and the repetition of the dun and the drums is just what a great song. One of my favorite instrumentals of all time. And then Orion on Master of Puppets is another of my favorite instrumentals of all time, perhaps from Hammett's standpoint, what he does on that song, inspired by Rush. And speaking of that, when you talk about And Justice for All, you have perhaps some Rush-inspired stuff there because of the stop-start technique on And Justice for All. You have songs like Blackened, which keep in the tradition of, if you're in a thrash metal band, you talk about the impending possibility of apocalyptic doom because of nuclear war. You have songs like One, Anti-War, based on the novel by Dalton Trumbo. You have a treasure trove of epic tracks on this fourth installment, if you will. If we go back to Master of Puppets for a minute, you've got more anti-war sentiment with Disposable Heroes. It's very heavy. It's extremely aggressive. If it was produced a little bit, if it was produced differently in this manner, it would fit well on here. But I like where it is on that album. You get more. You could kind of get a return to Lovecraftian topics with The Thing That Should Not Be, also on, which is rather on Master of Puppets. Disposable Heroes, right? Again, in keeping in the same vein as, I mentioned Disposable Heroes. Keeping in the same vein with Disposable Heroes, you have a Sanitarium, Welcome Home, or the other way around, right? In dealing with, the tragedy that is in, like Rooster from Alice in Chains, the tragedy that is in not having or not welcoming or treating our veterans poorly when they come back home, kind of thing. So that's part and parcel for what it means to be a metal band, at least back in the day in the 80s. So yeah, wonderful stuff from Metallica, and it's a shame that they couldn't keep that going, but it is what it is. But I have these 4.5 wonderful albums to go back to, and it's a great moment in heavy metal and rock history, because again, I don't think we'll ever see the likes of stuff like this. I love James's voice in this early period. Okay, next is Megadeth, and like Metallica, perhaps their best albums are the first four. This is their sophomore effort. The first installment from Megadeth that you get, installment, is of course Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good, perhaps inspired by the Judas Priest album Killing Machine, also The Punisher perhaps. We see that definite inspiration on Rust in Peace with The Punishment Due, Holy Wars, the other way around. But the debut has some strong stuff on it. Mechanics comes to mind, Looking Down the Cross. All of side A is wonderful. I like the whole album from start to finish. It's a little unpolished, but not in the cool sense. It's not as cool as this. This is very raw and unpolished, and it works. It's very gritty and edgy. The first album from Megadeth is also very gritty and edgy, but the production is not as good as... The rawness is different, and the rawness is not as good as what's on Kill 'Em All, but I still like it. Instrumental goodness on that album, which made its way to a car commercial, I believe, a couple years back. But yeah, so you get to this, and this is where things really get going for the band with songs like Wake Up Dead, Peace Sells, of course. Devil's Island, I think, is an underrated masterpiece. Bad Omen, I Ain't Superstitious, and My Last Words. And of course, the iconic bass line that Dave Mustaine wrote for Peace Sells, not Dave Ellefson. And then you get So Far So Good, So What, which some wonderful songs on here that, Anarchy in the UK aside, I do like it, but you have much better stuff like Hook and Mouth is just great. I love the lyrics. I love the 1984 reference, a little man with a big eraser, changing history, that kind of thing. So, and I listened to the third album very much. Of course, we got another lineup change, but it is what it is. Just some wonderful stuff on that album. It's very aggressive and heavy and rough in places, despite that it's more polished than the first album. Then you get to Rust in Peace, their masterpiece, which is great from start to finish. A treasure trove of great guitar runs and solos with spider chords from Dave. Just a marvel of an album. Holy Wars, The Punishment Due, right? Tornado of Souls, Polaris. It's just an amazing album, and we never see the likes of that album again. Then you get other albums like oh gosh, it's not coming to me. You got albums later in the discography, right, or around the middle of the discography, like 13, which I think is kind of cool. I think it's a bit underrated. You have Dystopia, which I've grown to like this album. At first I was like, it's okay, but now I really like it quite a bit. The last album I've really not warmed up to, but it has its moments at times. But you have a large discography from Megadeth. Again, despite the fact that you got this rotating member, you have rotating members coming in and out, but there's a lot to like in the Megadeth discography. Despite that, oh, I gotta mention, have to mention the Marty Friedman era. You have things like Cryptic Writings, Euthanasia. Those two are fabulous, I think. I do like Parts of Risk. That's their Black album, if you will, doing a bluegrass number, more commercial attempts at more commercial success. I'm missing another Friedman album, I think. But anyway, yeah. So that's Megadeth's best period. Well, I'm sorry. What I mean to say is Megadeth's best period, of course, is for me personally. Sorry, not of course. I don't want to put words in people's mouth. But for me personally, Megadeth's best period is the first album, and through it including, say, Cryptic Writings / Euthanasia, whichever one comes last in that. Of course, I have to mention Countdown to Extinction. That's a great album as well. So yeah, Megadeth is a band I listen to quite a lot. Next is Slayer. Talk about great live albums, Decade of Aggression. This was hard to find for some reason when I first got it a couple of years ago. I had it in MP3 format. It's like I want to listen to this in the car if I can. Heavy through and through from their inception through and including them wrapping things up and calling it a day, although things do slow down when you get to South of Heaven and other parts in their discography. And the back half of their catalog is not as good as the first part. Everything from Show No Mercy through and including, let's see, I would say Divine Intervention. That's where it's at. But there's some stuff after that I like Roll Painted Blood, the last album with the guy from Exodus on guitar. His name is eluding me. But yeah, so again, they changed the sound a little bit, but at least they're consistent. They still, unlike Metallica, they're still heavy. So there's a lot to like. The Makeup Stage, Live Undead, right? Show No Mercy, Hell Awaits, and what can you say about the magical, if you will, Rain in Blood, and South of Heaven. All right, so Slayer. Got to include this next one. Pantera, talk about great live album, Official Live. This is out of print, I do believe. They're great live here, and I've not seen them live, unfortunately. But yeah, Pantera, to quote Martin Popoff, is Metallica on steroids. They have the glam period. Where I came in with Pantera was with the power metal album, where Phil is still singing in that high register, aka a la Rob Halford styling, because that's how he sang when he and I were in high school. I didn't go to the same high school, but I ran into him quite a few times during some Mardi Gras festivities, just coincidental. And then later on, I would see him all the time at this bar that I worked in an area of Metairie called Fat City, which is on the outskirts of downtown New Orleans, where I live now. Metairie, that is. But so, more of an acquaintance than a friend, but he had that wonderful high register vocals when he sang in a local band called Razor White. And it's unfortunate they didn't record anything with him, but I did see them during Mardi Gras 3 or 4 times, and they were wonderful. And that power metal album is where I came in, and it's not talked about much, because you have the glam period with Terry Glaze, then Phil comes in for that one high register, and then they change direction with Cowboys from Hell, which has some of that high register but not as high, and then a mixture of the lower register stuff, and then after that it's all lower register from Phil, and it works. And of course I like the lower register Phil more, but I kind of wish he would do some more high register stuff, because I'm a big Judas Priest fan. So anyway, so yeah, you get albums like Far Beyond Driven and Vulgar Display of Power, which are my 2 favorite. Cowboys from Hell would be next, and then probably Reinventing the Steel is my least favorite. I do like Southern Trendkill, but there's a couple songs I don't like. It sounds too grating. But overall, what a great band. What a great way. I'm sure I'm not the first person to think this way, but to piggyback on what Martin Popoff said about Pantera being Metallica on steroids, Pantera filled a void when Metallica went soft. So Pantera, and keeping in the spirit with Phil Anselmo, a band I love to death, is Down. I have this. I have everything by them except the live album. Maybe I have it in MP3. I have to double check, or I was going to purchase that. Anyway, but yeah, this is a great groove. Very different from Pantera, but that groove-oriented, kind of more sludgy type music. Very slow and doom-laden type material. I'm not a big Crowbar fan at all, but I love this stuff. You have this, the second and third album, the live album, and the 2 purple EPs. Those 2 purple EPs are fabulous. They're supposed to do 4 of those, but they ended up only doing the 2. So yeah, Down is a band. This is a must-have band for me. Next, this is kind of cheating, but this isn't the cheating part. The next band I have to include as one of the 50 bands I listen to the most is Celtic Frost. Their early period from Morbid Tales, going back to Hellhammer, then Morbid Tales, and Emperor's Return, then this, into the Pandemonium, and then Cold Lake, they go off the rails with doing a glam album, or close to glam album, with Cherry Orchid and all that. Then they get back on track with the comeback album, Monotheist, and then they break up, but then you get the band Triptykon. So here's where the cheating comes in. I count Triptykon as an extension of Celtic Frost. So Celtic Frost / Triptykon. They only have 2 albums in an EP, but they're wonderful. Very heavy, almost in many ways as heavy as this album, but even heavier. Almost to the borderline of grating, but I can handle it. I can tolerate it. Anyway, so Celtic Frost / Triptykon. Next is a band that I fell in love with in high school. I just saw it in the catalog one day, and I was like, who is that? Let me explore this. And I'm talking about Cirith Ungol. Great discography. They don't have a huge discography. 8 or 9 albums. They have a wonderful live album with 4 discs in it because it's 2 CDs and then 2 DVDs or Blu-rays. And Tim Baker's voice is just amazing. Has a, I don't want to say a Rob Halford sound. It's his voice is totally unique, but there's brief moments when you listen to him that kind of sounds like Halford a little bit, but not quite, if that makes sense. And whether you talk about the debut Frost and Fire, and you have the follow-up King of the Dead, the last 2 albums I did a review of the last album, which I just adore. The album before that is not as good, but I do like it. It's good, but not great. And all their albums are graced, maybe with the exception of one, with the Michael Moorcock character, the Eternal Champion. Sometimes the specific avatar of the Eternal Champion, known as Eric of Melniboné, the albino elf, if you will. Which lends itself to the mood and atmosphere of this rainbow-esque demons and dragons and dungeons kind of flair with respect to the lyrics and the writing. Can be sludgy at times, but also can be, despite the vocals, power metal type. It's really hard to describe their music. They're very unique, or most of it is very unique sounding. Again, very hard to describe, but I love the vocals. I love the music. There's just something so inviting about this. There's a mysteriousness to this band, and there's no one like Cirith Ungol, if you ask me. An underrated gem of a band. Not for everyone, but I do love them. All right, next is a band I also just adore. Talking about Uncle Acid and the Deadbeats. This to me is their masterpiece. One guy on YouTube, I forget which channel I was watching about 3 years ago, maybe 2, was describing the vocalist as a creepy version of John Lennon. I get that, not at first, but when you said it, I was like, oh, and I started listening to them. One night I was like, oh yeah, I get that. This is, as I said, their masterpiece. They have 5 or 6 albums, and they have a live album that just put out about a year and a half ago, 2 disc set, which is amazing. I think it's recorded in New York somewhere. And then their last studio album was a bit of a disappointment, called Nella Ora Blue, where they went. It's a great concept, doesn't work totally. At times it does, where they got in touch with the film writers and script writers for the Giallo films of Italy, horror and suspense films, like Dario Argento, etc. I don't know if they worked with him. But anyway, they got in touch with some actors and they had them do a concept album, and at times it works and at times it doesn't. So anyway, but yeah, this is a great doom. The best way to describe them is, if you're not familiar with them, is psychedelic doom, and it works. It's wonderful. Next, keeping in spirit with doom metal, have to mention Electric Wizard. Like Uncle Acid and like Cirith Ungol, we have a vocalist that's pretty much unique to his own self, and they have a pretty big discography, 10 albums. The first album, Electric Wizard, and then the last album, Wizard Bloody Wizard. It's too bad that they broke up. Couple of lineup changes, but they all work. You have the album that is not a total Electric Wizard album. It's pre-Electric Wizard. Has some great tunes on it, but it sounds like Electric Wizard, like 13 tracks. Have to get that if you're a fan. Doom metal at its finest. Stoner doom metal at its finest. This is Let Us Pray. It's not their magnum opus, but this is one I decided to present to you today because I was listening to it. Mother of Serpents is amazing. The Outsider, House of Whipcord, and The Black Drug is phenomenal. This is a great album. So yeah, I have to mention Electric Wizard. What a great discography. 10 is a nice, solid number to have in your discography. Next, you knew this was coming if you've been watching this channel. Have to mention High on Fire. Talk about a great discography. They have, gosh, 10 or 11, maybe even 12 albums now in their discography. Don't quote me on that. They have 2 live albums, part 1 and part 2, which are during the tour of, let's see, Snakes for the Divine, I believe. I don't know why they just didn't release that as a double album. But yeah, so I've not had the joy to see them live. But the next band I have that's tied to this band, you know who it is, right? But yeah, what can you say about anything that Matt Pike is involved in? Great heavy metal band inspired by bands like Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, even Celtic Frost, Hellhammer, that side of thing. Grating vocals, and yet it doesn't annoy me. Matt Pike keeps rising up as one of my favorite guitar heroes of all time. And of course, what I hinted at is the band Sleep. They only have 3 albums. They have the debut, which is out of print, which I think is just called Sleep. It's got an image of Salvador Dali's face, like it was peeled off and then held up with sticks. That floating thing that Dali did. I have it in MP3 format, but it's just one big long track because that's the only way I could get it for whatever reason. The Holy Mountain sophomore effort is amazing. They have an EP called Volume 2, I think, which is also out of print. This is one song, you know, dung, dung, right? It's just great, though. It's very meditative and relaxing. It's called Dope Smoker. They re-released it at one point, called Jerusalem in parts. Doesn't work. It's better not broken up. And then the third album, The Science, is just a treasure trove of great heavy metal, doom, stoner rock, metal, and then they put out an EP called Iambic, a tribute to Tony Iommi, and they should have just put those songs on Sciences and made it a double album, and that's where they left it. And for the Sciences tour, I saw them live, and they're wonderful. Matt Pike is amazing. So of course, Cisneros Al is wonderful, and the drummer as well, whose name eludes me. But yeah, what a great band. Only 3 albums. They have 1 live album, which only came out on vinyl. I have it in MP3 format as just 1 track, but it is what it is. Despite only having 3 albums and 1 live album, this is a band I listen to all the time. So that will end it for part 1. Let me know in the comments what are some of your 50 bands and artists that you listen to the most, if you'd like to share. Stay tuned for part 2. As I said, I'll have that shortly. Thanks for watching. Take care. God bless.